Welcome to the Recover You podcast with Kylene and Patrick. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be.
Hello, Kylene.
Hi, Patrick.
What's so funny?
Just our conversation leading up to this. I'm very excited.
You're very excited?
Mm-hmm. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
We were actually talking about how the Bengals have a pretty outside shot to make the playoffs.
That's not
what we were talking about?
No.
Huh.
Although, congratulations on West Point yesterday.
Yep. Army beat Navy. 6 out of the last 8 years, they've beaten Navy. Beat Navy. And our son Keegan was at the game.
They won because he sang the national anthem in the
He was part of the group.
In the Glee Club.
Yeah, he was part of the group that sang the Star Spangled Banner. That was really cool. And then he texted later and said it's the most exciting football game he's ever been to.
Yeah.
So now,
I can imagine.
Now, in his defense, he went to a Bengals game when he was like 7. And then he went to a bunch of high school games. And then
since he's been there, he's gone to a lot of football games.
That is true. Yeah. Our Army Navy is pretty
And he went
special.
to all the football games in high school, playing in the band.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So,
yep. Yeah. Our Army Navy is pretty special. So, what's interesting is what we wanted to talk about tonight. And I think this is the last sit down recording podcast of 2023.
There's one more.
There's one more that we're going to sit down and record. Okay.
It may just be me though.
It makes me feel sad. So how do I manage it when I'm sad? What do I do with that?
Everyone, as I was giggling, it's because but we were talking about this. Normally I do the lead-ins to the episodes, and normally I kind of have a little bit of a plan of what we're going to talk about. And today Patrick's like, I have a plan and I will do the lead-in. And I was like, okay, let's do this. I don't know I don't know. I sort of do. You mentioned it.
Yeah. So anyway, but we wanted to talk. Here we are. It's December 10th, and we've made it through Thanksgiving. And we actually just recently had our annual polygraph check-in. And so what's interesting through all of this stuff, and then you start to think about, well, what am I going to get for people for Christmas? Did I get enough? Did I not get enough? And so, one of the things that we'd like to talk about tonight is managing difficult emotions. And so there's a lot that can come up in the holidays. Now, we have done...
We've been navigating the holidays.
Yep.
We've done navigating uncomfortable emotions, something like that.
Yeah. But I also, I really do think it's a topic that you have to stay focused on, because we are emotional creatures and we forget. And it's nice to hear that even the most solid of looking people have difficult emotions.
Oh, yeah.
And so, even I know that sometimes, I don't know about you, but sometimes I will feel the pressure of working with and getting to know a lot of men who know my story and love the fact that we have a podcast and think it's great how far we have come. And you feel that pressure, right? At times, that pressure to set the example. That
we've gone public with our story. Sometimes it makes it harder to share when we have difficult emotions, or when we have bumps in the road, or when we, have trauma responses that are totally normal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I think what I would like to do when we talk about managing difficult emotions is maybe do a little bit of storytelling from this past week and what we went through as we were coming up on the annual polygraph.
Yeah.
So,
and I'll just put my contribution to this topic today. Because as you had mentioned, wanting to talk about that, and I was thinking, it might be important to mention from the betrayal side, this is going to look very different when I talk all the time about safety being established. So this is going to look very different if you're in the very first phases of established, like you just discovered, right? Like those first 3 months or so, because managing those thoughts and those emotions and those things that come up, it will be incredibly difficult, no matter how many tools you have, no matter how many resources, no matter how many people you talk to. I would love to say, well, if you do this, this, and this, you'll breeze through it and you won't have, anxiety attacks or these moments of just total panic about what's happening in your life. And I would love to be able to tell you that. And the reality is that while you're still in the phase of feeling like, I don't know I don't feel safe, I don't feel like there's any stabilization in the relationship, that will be just very, very hard. Now, all of those tools and resources help. They make you not feel alone. They help you understand that what you are feeling is very normal. That that other people have gone through this and survived, and all of that is true. So even if you're in that phase right now, I want to encourage you, it is temporary. It is temporary. I think the type of conversation that you and I are going to have today is probably going to lean more towards once you're in that stability, right? And what does that look like? So you can be doing totally great, and all of a sudden, kind of what you're going to share here is we have a bump in the road. And what is that? It's a lot of times on my end, it's a big PTSD response or a trauma response, or flare. Sometimes I will have flares, and it's not even maybe something you've done. It's just I'll have a dip in my health, and I'll have like a trauma flare, or a mental health kind of flare incident, and it's kind of normal. And
or eat too much Chex Mix.
Yeah, we can talk about that too.
Yeah.
And what he's talking about there is we had a Christmas party, and oh gosh, this is getting into the weeds a little bit, but okay. If you want to get FDN, health focused, gut health focused, briefly. So glyphosate is the primary chemical in the pesticide that we use a lot around the country, called Roundup. And they use it on a lot of grain crops. So it's used a lot in wheat and corn and, things like that. And so we sort of inadvertently, if we eat a lot of grain-based products and a lot of like cereal, for example, then we get glyphosate. And the problem with ingesting glyphosate, first of all, it's been linked actually to things like cancer and other health concerns, people being exposed to like high amounts of it. But even in a small amount, it increases gut permeability. And so when we have increased gut permeability, it leaves us more susceptible to inflammation throughout the body. And so whatever susceptibility you might have, genetically speaking, or, whatever, then that can flare at the time. So if you have a susceptibility to more anxiety, or in my family, like my mom and I, if we eat too much corn, or high fructose corn syrup, then or like my mom's joints will hurt, my knees will hurt really badly. And it's really, really a pain. And so the reason Patrick's bringing that up is because we had a Christmas party and it was super fun. And I had Chex Mix, which has a bunch of, rice and corn. And so I joke when I'm like, oh, it's a bowl of glyphosate. That's kind of my joke. And if you look at, there's an EWG article from like 2019 where they did a study that one serving size of like all of these different cereals that are like really, really popular, was over the amount of what is quote unquote recommended. And I would say none of it's recommended, but over the recommended amount of the daily allowance of being exposed to glyphosate for children. And nobody measures, right? Nobody's going to measure the amount of cereal you pour in your bowl. So anyway, that's why I joke about that. And yeah, I had a rough week actually after the party, and in some ways, and I think I had a bunch of Chex Mix, and I had a bunch of M&Ms, which, oh my gosh, you never eat M&Ms, and that's it's a lot of sugar. I had a lot of sugar, but I also had like food dyes and things like that. And so, if you're susceptible to different things, and I have that, I have a real functional medicine sort of health background, so I kind of connect to those things. Mm-hmm. But anyway, that's kind of what you're.
Yeah, and oddly enough, if you're not eating what you're used to, if you're consuming things that are a little bit more manufactured in nature, it could have an impact on how you feel, and not just how you feel from like your joints hurting, but like emotionally, it may actually, you may not be as grounded and solid as you can be. So like if you're having a what I call dessert, but what everybody else says is Starbucks, going through and getting a 900 calorie Starbucks.
Well, yeah. I don't have Starbucks very much anymore, and I had one the other day, and that day, my knees hurt.
Yeah. So anyway, but okay. So the event that we went through this week was my annual polygraph. So we have decided, and you've asked, and I've said absolutely that we'll do an annual check up a polygraph. And so I think the story that everyone has heard is I did one in disclosure, which a lot of people do, and then this would have been my fourth, or was my fourth. So you actually changed up the questions this year a little
Well,
bit.
okay, so I was in, I think, I don't know if it was a flare, but we had something going on, and then I was like, I think maybe I'd like to change the question. So yeah, I
Yeah,
did.
yeah. So you change the questions, and I can tell you, what my having passed the polygraphs, I never really feel like I'm going to have an issue with the polygraphs, um, but I don't like them. So I'll just flat out say, because I think and for those of you who have been through a polygraph, I think they're nerve wracking. You sit in a chair with blood pressure cuffs on and things on your fingers, and they ask you questions. You got to keep your eyes open, and they're just not fun. I mean, you know why you're in there, and I think it kind of hit me a little bit that morning, or that midday as I was driving to it, and I said, the part of it is you're relying on somebody else that can impact your. So if let's say you have a bad polygrapher, if he doesn't download the software update or whatever it could be, right? There's a whole notion of things that could throw it off, and you're kind of not in control, and so there's a little bit of a punitive side to it, in a sense, or you feel that way, right? You feel that way. And even though, I was like, hey, I got nothing to worry about, right? And so you showed me the questions. I had nothing to worry. There was one on there that said, and I'm going to paraphrase, is there anything you're hiding from me or lying to me about, or something like that?
I think it was the reason ended up not being a good question. I think it was because it is there now, or has there ever been something you are hiding from me intentionally, or something like that. And it was
Yeah, it was
basically my
very broad.
my point with the question was sort of like, is there something you're lying to me about specifically? Like you're
Yeah.
hiding something intentionally that I need to know, was sort of like the intent of that
Yeah.
question, but I
Yeah.
didn't word it as well. And if in our other, I think we've done an episode on polygraphs, right? And so the formation of the question is very important, because it needs to be a question where it's an easy yes or no. The guy does not have to overthink
Overthink.
the answer. And apparently I worded it in a way that did not produce that outcome. It produced the opposite, and you were overthinking it.
Right.
Yeah.
So going into the polygraph, I was a little bit nervous, like I always am. And you and I would talk about it. And I think I even voiced it. I said, "Hey, I'm a little nervous," but I had passed three already, so I was like, "Well, it's just me being nervous, and it's not really an issue." And I remember kind of thinking on that question, like kind of thinking, well, she's probably talking about, in my addiction, is there anything I'm hiding, like a burner phone? You hear these stories about, guys will be like, "Hey, go look at my phone." They have covenant eyes on their phone or something like that, but then they go get another burner
Mhm.
phone, or different things like that, right? And so I was like, "Oh no, I'm fine." I mean, there's nothing going on. So, but I was really nervous, and I was really voicing what was nervous, and that was a really kind of difficult. I could feel it. I wasn't as attentive through the week. I wasn't as just kind of easygoing and flowing in my emotions. So anyway, we go to the polygraph, and
You go yeah.
I go to the polygraph, and we go through it, and it's a process and all of these different things.
And by
And
the way, the guy that we have is
he
amazing.
is
He's
amazing.
really nice. He's really thoughtful. He's really careful.
He knows, yeah, he knows that they're scary. He knows that they're emotional, and he
He's not
knows.
trying to trap you.
No,
He's trying to help you
right,
pass,
right.
which
He's
is the
using it
goal.
as a tool to, I think, generate positivity as opposed to a tool to generate negativity.
Which is
Yeah,
how we view it. It's a
right.
tool to build trust. If you choose to go through reconciliation and you choose to get a polygraph, the goal is for it to be a tool in building
Right,
trust. Yeah.
right. So I sit down in the chair and I'm going through the polygraph, and my mind is all over the place. It is swirling. It
Because
is.
you had all that Chex Mix, I'm telling
It's
you.
because I had all the check weeks. Yeah, yeah. I had some M&Ms too. But it was really interesting. I could not. And in previous polygraphs, I'd been able to settle myself down,
Mhm.
and this was really hard. It was just really all over the place. And so the polygraph ends, and he goes, "Hey, what's going through your mind on this question?" Like he asks it right away, and
Mhm.
I was like, "Oh no!" And my whole temperament just dropped,
Mhm.
because I was like, I failed the polygraph, and I'm gonna have to come home to you, and we're gonna have to talk about this, and I'm not doing
What's
anything.
interesting is you had the questions in advance.
Hmm.
You even said something to me as you were going, and I was like, well, you know, if anything happened at this point, at this
You
stage
gotta
in the
give it the
game,
benefit of the
I
doubt.
would
Yeah.
give you the benefit
Yeah.
of the doubt. So like that, so anyway, keep going with the
Yeah.
story. But yeah,
So
you're going into it with that, all of that
right,
information.
absolutely, absolutely. And I also know like part of me, because I said this to him and I've said it to other people, like, to accomplish good, what is good in life, sometimes you have to do hard things. And, this is no different. And I really do believe that. Sometimes you have to do hard things, you know what I mean, to get through things, you know what I mean? Like any sort of major objective that you're going after is hard at times. And this is one of those things. So I'm not like, I'm not just dismissive. I don't talk bad about it behind people's back. I think it's a good tool. And so he goes, "What's going through your mind?" And I said, I'm all over the place. I can't, like, I was thinking, because sometimes I'm a slow processor. So I'm like, am I being open and honest with Kylene about how I'm feeling as often as I should? And he was like, he actually said, he goes, "Listen, I thought it was a bad question when you came in, but you were so confident the way you always come in, very confident, that I didn't think anything of it. You had no issue with it." He goes, "So we're going to change the question." So he said, basically, he put
He just added
like, in your
in the
addiction.
addiction. Yeah, he
Right.
just added like 2 words or something.
Yeah. And then we went through it again and I passed. It was no issue. So then, but I still feel horrible. I feel like I've blown this thing. I mean, and he's upbeat. He's like, "Good job, you passed." And I'm like, "No, internally, I'm like, no, I didn't." And so he's like, "Well, do you want me to, do you want to call your wife and let her know that we changed it?" Or he goes, "Or do you want me to?" I said, "It'd probably be better if you did." And so he called you and said, "Hey," and he was really nice and kind of explained it to you. And, and what I think the words I remember was, "You're not really supposed to be that broad on a polygraph. It has to have a targeted side to it,
And
And
the way he worded it, I think, was that everything needed to be applicable to the addiction because that's what you're being tested on.
right, right.
And so that's what he's like, so I added that in.
Yeah.
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 Or something to that effect.
Right, right, exactly. And then he was like, "All right, man, good job. I'll send you the report." And and then I left and he was all upbeat. I'm walking out to the car and it feels like a death sentence. It feels like and so I'm having this quasi panic attack, right?
I think you had the panic attack and I'm not sure you've ever really experienced that. I mean,
right.
for me, I think I would have been, "Oh, I'm panicking.
Well,
Welcome to a familiar
yeah.
sensation of rumination and
Right,
OCD
right.
and ADHD thoughts all happening in my brain
Yeah,
at once."
yeah.
And I think that's like one of the first times that happened for you. And so in the moment, you were like, "What is going on?"
Right, right. And because once again, I can always generally center myself and go get myself locked in and say, "Okay, let's go ahead and go through this." I'm very good like that in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
and just could not in this thing.
Yeah.
And so I got into the car real quick and I debated really fast. Should I just drive home for a little bit and just kind of
Like
clear my
process.
thoughts, or should I call you? And I decided to call you. And so because I was like, I know you're going to be like, "Why didn't he call about changing the question beforehand?" You know what I mean? And all of these different things, and
Because
it's,
I think he had done that before.
he did. Yeah, he
There
did.
was something
You had
before.
added a 5th question. He says, "I can't do 5."
I'll
So,
blend it
yeah,
into
I
it.
got
Yeah.
before.
And so
Yeah.
he had done that ahead of time.
Right. And there's actually something as you go through recovery, it's called the double bind. And the double bind is you have to choose, you're faced with a choice either way.
Between a rock and a hard place.
And what you perceive
Yeah.
is that neither one has a good outcome. Right? Or neither
easy
one is
outcome.
easy.
There might be a
right?
right outcome.
Yeah.
There's both of them. It's like a rock and a hard place. Both of them are hard outcomes. Difficult choice.
Right. So I really felt like that was a huge double bind at that point, because I was like, I can go home and not talk to you for a period of time, but I am going to have to talk to you when I get home. And if I don't call you right away, you may think like, "Well, what's going on?"
Yeah, you
right?
always call me on your way home.
Yeah. So I was like, "Well, let's just call and let's just," because I was like, "Are you going to be mad? I have no idea how you're going to react to this thing." Right. And so,
"Oh, ye of little faith."
yeah. So we got on the phone and you were a little bit like, "Why was that question hard?" You know what I mean? Like,
Well, no, what happened on my end was, my thought process was kind of like, you are not like that. You're not an overthinker. You're not a ruminator. So as you started to describe to me what happened, I started wondering, well, why was that a difficult answer for you? If you knew my intention and you knew what your answer was, your answer was no, and you had the question ahead of time, why all of a sudden were you panicking? So then I was like, okay, well, he added these two words in addiction. I was like, is there something else you're hiding from me outside of your addiction? Because that was the question, right? Are you hiding anything?
Yeah.
And as you described it, I was like, oh no.
You're like, that's Tuesday lunch for me. That's how your mind works, right?
Yeah. I basically, as you described it, because the way my brain works, this is not your weak link. This is my weak link. That my brain is a very ruminating. I have tendencies towards OCD and ADD and rumination and all this. It's just very hard. My brain is not an easy place to live sometimes. And so when you started describing your response to the question and walking me through the process, I knew fairly quickly it wasn't that you were trying to hide something from me, is that you were over analyzing while you were trying to tell the truth to make sure that you passed the question. And so basically, as soon as that clicked, like I understood and I could relate it so much to how my brain worked that I was like, okay, I get it. I think what took me off guard though was really just that it happened because you are usually so self-assured, especially with addiction recovery, and your answers are like, I know who I am and I know what I've done and I know what I'm not doing.
Right.
And so that's why I had to just like think for a minute,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I just thought of this when he shifted the question around. There was a question that was part of that series was, do you intend to tell Kylene the truth?
Mm-hmm.
And what's so funny is as he went through that, I was like, because I was so traumatized because I was like,
yeah, you were so inflamed at that point.
Yeah. And so I was like, yes. And he was like, okay, you passed. And I was like, oh my goodness. And so anyway, it was a hard conversation. I did not feel good all the way home. And so I had to really try to think through why I felt like I had failed, because I felt for a long time that I had failed that test, even though, we got the report even before I got home and it said, no deception noted. So, I mean, he actually, the report was already out. And so it just felt really odd, really odd. And so that night I was kind of worn out and really kind of just emotionally spent, and went to bed early that night, got up the next day feeling pretty good, starting to resolve things. And then as the morning went on, I was like, something's going on with you. And sure.
Well, this is, I think, I don't know if it's a dichotomy. It's a pattern that I think we haven't really talked about in the podcast yet, but it's something to kind of let people be aware of, that like if you haven't experienced it yet, I think this is normal and this is common, that once you kind of get into the stability phase, you're going to take turns sort of being there for each other as you process. So you're going to process things, and this might not always happen. You might both have an issue at the same time. But what we've noticed a lot through our recovery is that we will essentially take turns. And so the day that you came back, you were so stressed about it. And like deep in my core, I knew that you had told the truth. So I knew that the focus that night was to make sure that you were okay and to kind of calm you down and make sure you like could go to sleep and like know that everything was fine, right? Mm-hmm. But as much as that was it kind of shook you, that was a different pattern, I woke up the next day and it kind of shook me too. I was like, this is weird, this is, and there's so much, I just felt like angry that day. I just felt like a lot of irritation, anger, like this is like, this whole process is not fair, right? In a lot of ways, like, to the betrayed partner. It's just so much that we didn't sign up for, right? And so so once you kind of were safe basically, right, and stabilized, and we slept on it, then the next day my emotions had space to come up, and I was kind of processing the whole deal as well. So we kind of took turns on that, which again I think is kind of normal once you're at a certain place, and know that it's okay to feel all your feelings.
Right. And what's interesting is as I woke up on Thursday morning and I felt really good. And by the time I had interfaced with you and noticed that you,
I know,
and I believe I was being empathetic and I was doing all of those things, but it set me back down again. You know what I mean? And so we went to dinner that night and got home, and I remember I was just so tired.
Yeah,
And
that's what wears you out.
yeah, and I think I even said to her, I was like, no discussions tonight. I just need to go to bed. And
Which I
so,
don't think I was bringing anything up. I think I
yeah,
was just like out of the blue. You were
right,
like,
right.
we're going to bed.
Well, I think I was trying to set expectations. Like I really need some sleep. And so like, I think even when we got in bed, I rolled her. I was like, hey, do you want to talk about anything? You know what I mean? I knew like I didn't want to be a complete, but then by Friday we were improving and we were
I
actually
think we
doing
just
good.
needed the space
Yeah.
to like,
Yeah.
and that's the thing. Okay, so we're going to talk about managing difficult
Yep.
emotions, or maybe we need to rename this, bumps in the road or whatever. Or
Yeah.
seem like,
Yeah.
I don't know how you term that, but um, I think one of the biggest things is giving yourself space to feel what you feel, because
Mhm.
one of the things that's come up through this is, do you want to talk about Thanksgiving really quickly? Because I'm going to kind of connect the two.
Sure.
So, okay, so one of the things that came up through this, like, is in Thanksgiving, we kind of had a disagreement, and did we already talk about this in an episode or no? Okay, I don't, maybe not. We'll keep it short just in case we did, but there was just sort of a misfire, and what it really did for us was, it really surprised us in that it was kind of a trauma trigger for both of us, and we were not expecting that because we've been doing so great, and we really haven't both been activated that intensely. I don't know if ever we've both been activated that intensely at the same time before. So even when we were going through sort of the height of everything, you know you might have been really depressed one day, or I might have been really angry one day, or whatever, but this was both of us super activated at the same time, and it was not healthy, it was not good. And it really took us into kind of trauma activation mode. And like, just what I mean by that is, when you have these activations, it takes your nervous system back into the past. And so in that moment, even though we were fine and we've been fine and we were just having a disagreement, because of everything that we've been through, our nervous system was like, your relationship is in danger, everything that you've done is a waste, you're horrible people, like your nervous system just takes you right back into like the worst part of it.
Yeah.
And what was really, really unusual about that particular disagreement is that it was both of our nervous systems super heightened, super activated. That almost never happens. And so it was like really unusual. And so it just really took both of us off guard, I think. So the reason I brought that up is because one of the things that we kind of found, what you call after action plans or whatever, like we kind of like
After action review.
yeah, we look back and we're kind of like, what just happened here? And one of the things that kind of came up through that is, I think uh, you have sort of still holding on to this belief that in the end it's not going to work out, or that I can just, at the drop of a hat say goodbye, even after everything we've been through, right? Like, for like, we disagree and that's it, right? And so I was kind of thinking, what if we create this, I don't know, we haven't determined what to call it yet, but like this list of commitments, right? This relational connection, commitment, document together about what we're bringing to the table and what we're committing to each other. Because as we kind of have navigated this, I thought one of the things that would be nice is if we go, hey, we're allowed to disagree and we're allowed to argue, and it's not the end of the world. It really is okay. Like, you're safe in those emotions, and to really have kind of already talked through, for you on your side, hey, really, like, the only thing that's going to get me to leave at this point is if you cheat again,
Mhm.
right? If you act out. Otherwise, like, it's really okay for us to disagree, and that's an okay thing for our emotions to come up and for us to discuss things, and to not always have it be
Right.
easy.
Yeah. Yeah. If I, trying to land the plane here on managing difficult emotions, one of the things that our reaction was, or my reaction was, is to get in to see my therapist. So I scheduled him on Friday to try to work through this. I was really trying to work through some of the emotions that were coming up. Like, why did I consider a pass a failure? Why was I so nervous going into it? You know what I mean? All these different things. I think it's pretty clear why you kind of got activated from it. I think it was and actually our therapist had an interesting take on it,
On the polygraph.
on the polygraph and the emotions of it. So early on when you're in recovery, I guess you could argue, well, there are. I mean, like if you look at Patrick Carnes, I think his 20 steps, 40 steps, sorry, 30 steps to
100
recover,
steps.
100 steps. But there are early recovery tasks, there are mid recovery tasks, and there's late recovery tasks, right? And so depending on what, if you spent money, you got to make financial amends, all these different things. And so there's levels of tasks. And certainly the full therapeutic disclosure with polygraph is an early recovery task. Now, one of the things that does come up is when you're in that kind of environment, there's a hierarchy that goes on there. So the betrayed spouse is generally kind of in charge of the betrayer. You can only be on your phone 30 minutes a day. We're not going to do this. We're not going to, you know what I mean? All these different kind of series of boundaries and rules. But as you move through recovery, some of that stuff comes down, right? And as you're generating trust and things like that, and that's specific to every couple. But when you take an annual polygraph, it can take on the emotional feel of that hierarchy again. And so one of the things that our therapist or my therapist brought up was it is entirely possible that where we had been living in a level field with each other for a long time and starting to get along is we get into this polygraph and
Starting to get along.
Well, getting along better, right?
I mean, like our relationship.
We're living as a couple.
It's feeling stable.
Right. We're living as a couple. We're not living in a
positive.
Right. Right. And so then you get to the annual polygraph and it's a series of questions. I'm worried I'm going to fail. What's the, you know what I mean? And all of a sudden now, and like your emotions kick back to maybe it's a trigger that brings you back emotionally to those early periods of, and most
that can be very unconscious.
Right. Yeah. And most, it's this whole thing. And I think you've mentioned it before is, you end up having to parent the addict, right? Well, you don't really want to parent the addict. You want to maybe parent them for a brief period of time, brief-ish, right? Whatever that may be, 6 months, 8 months, a year. But you don't want to live the rest of your life that way. It's not healthy.
Yeah, you want a partnership.
Yeah, you want a partnership. So there, the polygraph could have.
What he was saying is basically that what the polygraph, my response to it, or the emotions that came up after it, basically was, because it brought up the old negative emotions. It's like cellular memory or trauma memory, kind of bringing you back into the past, kind of like I was talking about with the nervous system before and kind of putting you down. And so that that makes sense to an extent because it is a very subconscious thing. So like as you're sort of processing what happened, you're like, yeah, but everything's fine. But then you have these emotions that are kind of uncomfortable coming up anyway. And so that makes sense.
So I think, the polygraph has the potential, and much like other events like that, has the potential to provide a tremendous amount of healing. It has the potential to really cement trust, and it really has the opportunity to give some victory to both sides of the relationship. It also, if done wrong, can traumatize. It can set things back. It can do all these different things, right? And of course, it depends on the polygrapher. I think, once again, you talked about our polygrapher.
Yeah, but then we also took stock of like how we approached it this year, and we didn't really handle it the same. So normally, there's a review of the questions with your therapist. That wasn't done. And I think you didn't really have any conversations with me about it either. So you had taken the questions and said, oh, this is fine, and then went into it. As opposed to if that question brought up a thought, let's clarify what that means and what my intention was with it so that you felt really confident. And so I think as nerve-wracking as the polygraph is, there was a sense almost of overconfidence or lack of preparation that did come into play here. And so when we were looking back on it, we're like, okay, why did this happen? So obviously my question was a little too open-ended. So it allowed for that thought loop to kind of allow your brain to have that time to ruminate so that it wasn't formulated properly. So on my end, I need to make sure that the questions are very clear. And then, if I change questions again or whatever, they need to be reviewed. Obviously, I think was a big thing that we kind of thought afterwards.
Right. And so, when you talk about managing these difficult emotions, one of the things that can actually help you manage your emotions, maybe not in the moment you're in, but it can help you in the future, is do exactly what you're talking about. Go back through that scenario over the last week and say, okay, what was it that was driving this? What was happening? And then that way you can you can develop a future plan. So, next year we get to this point, you change the questions, you and I sit down and have a deliberate conversation and say, what are you looking for? What has come up in the year maybe that has caused you difficulty? And then maybe what you do is like you said, I'll send them to the therapist. I actually sit down with the polygrapher before the test even starts and says, how do you feel about these 4 questions? He's such a nice guy.
Yeah.
We're just catching up with each other, blah, blah, about this, about that. And then hey, you ready? And then we go, and then maybe also scheduling support, when you do the full therapeutic disclosure, polygraph and whatever, you have people waiting for you, people ready to talk to you, things like that. So, maybe in the future, what we may need is you need to have somebody on standby that you can talk to the next day to kind of process through how you feel, and maybe myself as well. So, I think that's it. You can't predict when you're going to feel these tough emotions, but you can be better prepared to have someone help you with them. I think is, and maybe sometimes it's not, for like the way you were feeling the day after the polygraph, maybe I wasn't the best person for you to talk to. It might have been somebody else for you to kind of process through maybe the anger you were feeling and the unfairness that you were feeling and the disappointment you were feeling, And so, because I know, when I talked to my therapist on Friday, I was like, woo, when he came home. Yeah, I felt so much better because, he said things like, well, that question was pretty vague and most people probably would have failed that one.
We got feedback from both people that question, I was like, okay, well then, yeah, that answers basically all the questions. I don't really have an issue with what happened because that's the key.
Right.
I mean, it really is.
Right. So I think, we talked about this. So how do you manage your emotions? Number one, you don't want to squash them. You want to talk about them. You want to get them out there. They're going to come. You don't want to.
They're there for a reason.
Yeah, they're there for a reason. They're talking to you. They're telling you that you've got some sort of fear, or there's something that you haven't. Because one of the things that went through my mind is, am I a little bit too much in a performance state? Because I want to always pass the polygraphs.
No problems.
And polygraphs in 12 minutes. I actually can do them in a drive-through, and you know what I mean, and stuff like that. But no, that's actually not the case. And why is it that I feel that way? So I think
felt like you failed even though you passed.
Yeah. So I think when we talk about managing, difficult emotions, there are definitive processes that you can use. Deep breathing, you can, reach out for help in the moment, and those are all very powerful things. But I think probably the broader perspective is, why am I feeling these? And then what do I need to do about that? And then, because bad things will happen again, and the better you're equipped as they come around, the better you're going to be able to manage those emotions as they come up.
Well, I think a couple things I would say about it is that I don't actually view that as I don't know how you view it now, but I don't really view that whole after the polygraph emotions negatively too much, because I think, I actually think the way we processed and moved through was pretty healthy, in terms of like you communicated what you could in the time, and then as you processed, you communicated more, and you felt safe to come home and be sad and kind of be frustrated that you didn't pass, and talk through, and I kind of was trying to bring you down a little bit and kind of help you feel like everything's fine, right? And then the next day I felt safe to be a little irritated, and I wasn't like lashing out at you or having 5-hour conversations with you about the addiction or anything. I just kind of said like that these emotions are coming up for me, and that's kind of how I feel today. And it's totally, I kind of was like, it's fine. Like it'll, we didn't have to talk about it a whole lot. I kind of think I think I even said like, this is how I'm feeling, and it'll be okay, or something like that, right? Like it was kind of, it'll be fine. And then we did, and like within 48 hours or so, we were totally fine. And I think the end result there, because we didn't just go, oh no, it's actually like I can't feel this way or anything like that. They moved through, and because of all the work we've done, we didn't really go backwards. We just had this little kind of you look at a heart monitor or whatever, it's like a little spike, right? But then you
Mhm.
came back to the same place. It's not like we went back 3 steps, because then we kind of got back to our life and we were fine
And
after
actually,
that.
you can argue that you actually don't go back to the spot you were at. You actually, if you repair well and you resolve things appropriately and have a good perspective, you actually move forward.
Yeah.
And so,
Well,
I
and I
think.
think that's the other thing that I was going to mention. Why I brought up the Thanksgiving thing is I think the other piece, it's always safety is important no matter what phase you're in. It's always important. And so if you get into a thing like we did in Thanksgiving where we didn't feel safe in the moment, we have to kind of look back and go, well, why didn't we, with everything that we've done? What came up there? And so that's when we sort of noticed like the fears of like, okay, if we argue too harshly or whatever, I'm afraid that this will end in divorce because of everything else that's a totally separate issue, right? And so that's where I was like, well, how can we respond then in a way that creates a little bit more of that safety to address that concern? And
Right.
so that's where I think the document comes in, where it's like this is the commitment and expectation moving forward after everything we've been through, and what does that look like,
Mhm.
so that you don't really feel like you can't express yourself or else I'll divorce you. Yeah.
Well, and certainly, that feeling was at play. Like, okay, if I struggle on a polygraph, well, it's over. So that was at
Mhm.
play as well. So those, and since we had that conversation, I was really trying to pull myself back, but it took me a good
Yeah.
36 hours to kind of process through that. And I think maybe that would be the last thing I would tell people too on managing difficult emotions. Don't try to do it quickly. Sometimes it takes you a little bit of time, and don't be surprised if it does take you a little bit of time to kind of make sense of a stressful event.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And it is okay. And yeah, actually, we joked about this, but it is okay to go, listen, I need to get some sleep tonight. I can't, like that is okay. And you got to be careful when you say it. Like the day of discovery, if you tell your spouse, hey, I need some sleep tonight, I can't talk about it. That's probably
Well,
inappropriate.
it's also not, and this actually I think is an important thing to throw in there. It's also not a really good thing to say when your spouse is in the middle of a lot of activation.
Hmm.
So if I am like panicking and having like I'm super activated and I'm maybe hyperventilating or crying or anything like that, that's not the time to shut it down.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is not what we're talking about. And sometimes that happens. It's just, so that's
Yeah.
really not
Yeah.
okay. But no, like we were just sort of like, oh, this is a little uncomfortable. But we know we're gonna move through it, and we're not gonna hash it out at 10 o'clock at night tonight.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, but that's all I got. I think that I wanted to talk through what was a difficult week that ended on a real high note, and there was a lot of emotions in that
Yeah.
week, and
Well, I think
and
if you had to summarize it, it's like going back and analyzing, okay, is there a hole in our safety foundation?
hmm
And
hmm
what are the fears or the limiting beliefs that come out? Sort of like you would
right.
do if you relapsed, right? Like if when you talk to people about relapsing, it's like, okay, what were the ruminating thoughts there
hmm
that led us into this spiral? Because those are fears that still need to be addressed.
Right.
And so safety always, like what does that look like? Communication, validating the emotions and the feelings, not trying to suppress them, reaching out for help. So
hmm
talking to people and letting people know that you're sad or you're struggling, or talking to your therapist, your friend, or your support group. And then also, I mean, I think those kind of like, if we mush up everything that we just talked about, those are kind of the three big things. But then you mentioned ending on a high note, and I was like, yes, please, let's talk about just before we end, like give people some hope here, because this was a lot of
Yeah.
like, we've been on the struggle bus, but not really. Like
No.
these were like
No.
little blips.
Yeah.
So kind of wrapping up the year almost, and then the conversation definitely, but like, have we been in a good place?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's always important in anything that you're working towards to go, okay, it's December 10th at 5:47 p.m. Are we in a better place today than we were December 10th at
Oh my
5:47
God.
p.m. last year? And I think the way you're just laughing, and I know that to be the case, you're like, oh, absolutely we are. So, there's certainly fruit in the journey. And so I think, the journey that happened this week and the emotions that we were feeling and moving through, we're not the death knell of our relationship, but we're certainly a step in
Catalyst.
continuing to grow and repair and recover
Well,
this relationship.
and I think just from my own history, my own life history, and unhealthy attachments maybe that I've had in my life, one of the things that this process has taught me that's kind of been weird and uncomfortable to accept is that these types of disagreements are actually normal. Like that was something we talked about at Thanksgiving where we both had to sit back and go, "Oh, actually, even though our nervous systems were like, "Oh, you're back in the trauma of betrayal," the reality was we had a disagreement on something totally separated from that issue. It had nothing to do with betrayal. It had nothing to do, right? But it brought us back into that. And so kind of thinking through, hey, this is normal. Like this is okay. And actually it can be safe. It can actually be healthy
Mhm.
and totally okay to have these conversations. And it doesn't have to be scary.
Yeah.
And so I think in a way we had to go through that because we don't really argue very much. And so we don't really disagree,
Mhm.
much less argue, like get upset about things. And so I think to have that and then look back and be like, oh, we can actually do that in a healthier way.
Yeah.
But also that it's safe to do that. And then having the little blip in the polygraph. I mean, I don't know how you feel after the polygraph, but after you really personally beat yourself up for it. And I had to process a little bit in the 24 hours, but I think I was pretty supportive of like, no, I know you were telling the truth.
Mhm.
Now, emotions might still come up for me, but I know you were telling the truth.
Mhm.
And so I don't know for you having gone through that, if it makes you feel even more like, oh, she really does trust me. And like, did that actually on your end help you?
Yeah,
think-
it really did. And I also think that, like it's because here, and you and I talked about this, it did work out, right?
Mhm,
When you tell the truth, it did work out. And so,
mhm.
yeah, there was a blip and there was all these different things, but it worked out, right? It actually kind of worked out. So it's like, you can handle it. I can handle it. We'll get through this, when things get a little weird, like we couldn't understand, like, what the heck's going on? Like, I didn't know what was going on when it was first brought up to you. You're like, what? And
Yeah.
and
It
so,
just took us a minute to process,
yeah.
basically.
And
Yeah.
so, but it's okay. The report still says no deception noted, block is checked. We're moving on into 24. And you know what I mean? And we're still talking to each other.
Oh, we're even recording a podcast
Yeah,
episode
right,
today. Look
right.
at that.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
anyway.
So any other encouragement about managing difficult emotions or getting through to the other side?
Don't think that because you get them that something's wrong.
Mm.
You're going to get them. Listen to them and also understand, be patient with them, that sometimes they will process through quickly and sometimes it can take a little bit longer and
Yeah.
with a little bit more help.
Yeah, and like you
to
said, that's where
get through.
it's helpful to have people to talk to
Right.
because then
Coaches, friends,
yeah,
therapists.
and then you hear stories like this, and you're like, oh, I think this couple's getting along so well. And wait, they had an argument. That's normal. Like, that's okay.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
it is.
absolutely.
Yeah. And so that's where community can come in to really just, I use that word, make you feel normal. Like, this is
Right.
life. This is normal. This is okay. It's not bad. It doesn't have to be scary. And for us, it didn't have to take us back to square one. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this podcast interesting or helpful, it would mean so much if you leave a 5-star review or post a screenshot and share on social media. We are on a mission to share the message of recovery, and you can help get the word out. If you know a friend who could use this podcast, please share it.